Richard, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Let me start, as it were, far from your home ground in the Levant. Let me start in the Yemen. Let me start in the Red Sea. We keep hearing blood-curdling threats from, amongst others, the jumped-up twerp who passes for Britain's Minister of Defence, that we're going to go to war with Yemen. With whose army? I have no idea. What's happening in the Red Sea now?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be back on MOATS. I also don't know which army is going to take the fight to Yemen, because we tried this once already through the Saudis and the Emiratis, supplying them with weapons to do that, and they lost. And you know, this is not a long time ago. It's barely been a year since they had to go and make peace with the Houthis and admit defeat. And the situation in the Red Sea is very interesting, because when it comes to Gaza, you have 6 fronts, essentially. You know, you've got Gaza itself, you have the West Bank, and you know, the Jenin Martyrs Brigade, all the factions there that are giving the Israelis trouble because they're giving them trouble. Then you go to Syria, you go to Iraq, the American bases are under attack there. And then, of course, there's the Lebanese front and the 6th, and you know, which is last but not least important. That is the final front on you know, in this war, and it is without a doubt the most important, because what the Yemenis have done is disrupt global trade. So this is not just a question of punishing the Israelis financially for what they're doing in Gaza. It's also a question of making Western companies that do business with Israel and the United States, which is supplying Israel, also feel the shock. And so now they have to go around South Africa, and they have to go, you know, if they want to cross the Mediterranean into the Suez Canal and down the Red Sea, they can't anymore. So what Yemen have done is effectively bring or take shipping back 200 years. And make no mistake, they're suffering a lot more than they're letting on. This is deeply humiliating for the West. It's deeply humiliating for Israel. And the fact that their international trade has been severed from the South it's really causing them a lot of trouble. The thing is that the Americans, they pulled back one of their ships from the Red Sea because of several developments. Hezbollah just the other day struck the Israeli port city of Eilat, which is on the Red Sea, showing you that not just Hezbollah but also Iraq, both of them can reach that far south with the weapon systems that they currently have. And this is just a taste of what they actually possess. So the Americans are deeply afraid of a wider confrontation, even though the Israelis certainly want that. The Israelis are happy to drag the rest of the world down with them. But the resistance are constantly developing better and better weapon systems. And so the result is that this is not just a defeat on the economic front, but also militarily. These so-called great armies like the Israelis, ourselves in Britain and the Americans, they we can no longer posture the way that we used to. And so while there's a decline in Western capabilities, the capabilities of the resistance are just going up and up. And of course, this is, I haven't even mentioned Iran as well, which is, in possession of far better missiles and systems than Hezbollah and the Yemenis have access to. Although, once again, it should be pointed out how far they have come. It is really a problem now that this war is on 6 fronts. I don't see how the Americans and the Israelis are going to dig themselves out of this one. They're really pinned down, and any army knows that when you're pinned down on more than one front, you're in big trouble, never mind 6.
Yes, let's move then to one of the most important of those 6, the one which you and I are both very familiar with, namely Israel's northern border, Lebanon's southern border. Israel is upping the ante. I mentioned earlier the white phosphorus attack, which I saw with my own eyes, landing on civilians in South Lebanon just this day, as clear an act of war crime as it's possible to see. You could see it coming out of the aircraft and landing on civilians in South Lebanon. they keep upping the ante. They're going further and further. They carried out an illegal assassination just a few days ago in Beirut itself. How close are we to an all-out war, a la 2006, between Lebanon and Israel?
Well, I don't want to make any predictions, but in 2006, which is, I mean, it's almost 20 years ago now. Even back then, Hezbollah once again surprised the Israelis. They were coming out of tunnels like you see Hamas doing now. And the Israelis were paranoid of being taken out by these so-called ghosts, right? These troops that they would never see. And of course, I was just talking about how Iraq and Lebanon can strike in the Red Sea. The same thing in 2006 when they took out an Israeli ship. So the capabilities that they possess today really frighten the Israelis. They're on the Israelis are at a stage now of decline, which you see in empires or colonies, where they become so desperate to cling on to power and to exist and to stay, to keep control of whatever place they've invaded, that they become irrational. And they even end up, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They start accelerating their own demise. This is what we're seeing right now. If it comes to an all-out war, Israel is going to get hit very badly. And what they did with this assassination, this shows you that they're losing the war, because the primary front is in Gaza, right? You have the Qassam fighters against the Israelis. They're wiping the floor with them. Every day you have videos coming out of them taking out, ground units, bulldozers, tanks. It is so embarrassing. And so to distract from this, the Israelis have gone and carried out these assassinations. Salah Haruri, he was the deputy leader of the Hamas political bureau, and he was mentored by Qasem Soleimani. And the date, they assassinated Haruri on the anniversary of the assassination of Soleimani. That's not a coincidence. That was on purpose. It was to provoke the resistance. And then, of course, the same day, they also bombed this memorial service that they had for Soleimani in Iran. And then they claimed it was ISIS, which we all know is an Israeli and an American proxy. And then they did an assassination of Mousavi, who's an Iranian general advising Syria against al-Qaeda and ISIS. And then they also of course, carried out an assassination of the PMU in Iraq. And so these are Netanyahu's way of saying, I'm capable of doing things. But they're not going to win him the war. I mean, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin was also taken out by the Israelis. Did the resistance become weaker? No, on the contrary. The same thing with Soleimani. The resistance only became stronger. And this is because you can't defeat a resistance by killing one person, because the entire population is sick of Israel's oppression, of their occupation, of these things like dropping white phosphorus, which you just mentioned, which are so commonplace, and yet the whole world seems not to see it. So you can't defeat that by murdering one person. You have hundreds, thousands ready to take that person's place, and to continue the fight for liberation. So the last thing the Israelis want, if they were thinking straight, is a war with Lebanon. They can barely handle the front. I mean, just yesterday, the Hezbollah in retaliation hit it's actually an Israeli surveillance base. It runs drone operations, airstrikes, spy ops, Meron base, and it's at the highest point in occupied Palestine. And Hezbollah fired 62 ATGMs on it, and there's no Iron Dome that can deal with these things. They're land to land, and so 40 out of those missiles struck the Israeli base. And for the last 3 months, the Israelis have had their surveillance posts, observation towers. They're blinded now on the fence with Lebanon. So this is just a small taste of what is yet to come should the Israelis escalate foolishly and make this problem deeper than it is now.
Turning to the first front, I said earlier that the withdrawal of substantial numbers of ground troops from the northern part of Gaza is partly because of the spreading disease, fungal disease, that they have picked up in Gaza, a disease which has been the result of the destruction of water and sewage and electricity as a matter of deliberate policy. but to which the Israelis have not been affected before, exposed before. But the main reason, surely, is that the ground forces are being engaged by the Palestinian partisans of all factions and beaten in hand-to-hand fighting in these very auspicious topographical circumstances for a guerrilla army. I mean, it's very difficult to move tanks and artillery around the wreckage that Israel itself has made of 80% of Gaza. You have to get out your vehicle and come through the alley where the partisans are cutting them down in very large numbers.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, George, the tactics that we see Hamas employing today, their strategy and style of guerrilla warfare, without question, we will see people studying these tactics 100, 200 years from now, without question, because it is hard to show any guerrilla force that has fought, this well, this effectively against an army with nuclear weapons. The Israelis have a navy, they have an air force, they've got all this logistical and military and intelligence support from the West. Biden gave them $14 billion and they already get $3.8 billion a year. They're spoiled, silly. And of course, shamefully, Britain is also providing them support from Cyprus. And so, the point is that the Israelis get all this material support, never mind the political support, for their war effort, and they still fail. What does that say about Hamas, who are not only fighting, we should remember that the Hamas fighters are living in the same conditions that everyone else in Gaza is living in, right? So they're also short on food, they're short on water, they're struggling physically, and yet they persevere nevertheless. They come out on top, and they have proven the Israelis to be a weak, pathetic army. It's been 3 months now that this episode of the occupation of this war has begun, and the Israelis have failed to take a single military objective. They said they want to defeat Hamas. Hamas is still here. The Israelis haven't even been able to take out any Hamas infrastructure, never mind defeat Hamas itself. They managed to kill one leader who wasn't even in Gaza. And that was just to distract from their failures on the battlefield, the very ones you alluded to. And so in addition to failing to defeat Hamas, they said they want to liberate hostages, but all they've done is kill hostages. You've had at least 60 that have been killed by Israel's own bombs. And then another 3 that were killed by ground units when they tried surrendering. It's really an embarrassing, abysmal failure. And the only reason the war is still going is because Netanyahu needs this war for his war cabinet to have a purpose. Otherwise, it would be dissolved. And then he would immediately be thrown into prison or face, more charges. The second that this war finishes, one way or another, he's going to take the fall for everything. And then they won't say, well, it's Israel's fault as a whole, the occupation. They'll try and pin it on him as an individual. And he of course, shares a lot of the blame. But Israel tactically has failed, militarily has failed, and politically its reputation is in tatters.
He's just announced he's going to force his cabinet to take polygraph tests to prove whether they're lying when they say that they're not leaking. It's a very jolly cabinet atmosphere, I must say. Lastly, Richard, the ICC, you have to be black or be a Serbian to get convicted at the ICC. But the ICJ is a slightly different kettle of fish, a less politicized court, one would have hoped, with a better class of judge, more mindful of their legacy. That's why Israel's quite anxious about what's going to happen in the South African case. What's your view on it?
Well, I think, first of all, we should applaud South Africa. We should really thank our brothers and sisters there for taking this to the ICJ, because they have done not just Palestinians, but the whole world a service by reminding everyone of their obligations of international law. And unfortunately, it also has to be said, not to commit genocide. So the ICC is geared towards prosecuting individuals. And as you said, you only qualify for conviction if you're black or a Serbian. When it comes to the ICJ, to the International Court of Justice, this deals with countries, and it also rules on matters of opinion. And so right now, the only reason the Israelis are going to have to defend themselves, usually they wouldn't bother, is because they have signed the Genocide Convention, and they've also if you've accepted previous rulings, you have to go before the court. It's like the Americans with Nicaragua. They were kind of forced into that situation, even though they didn't want to be in it, although that was a different matter. But the ICJ will convene within a week, and it won't take them long to decide. And then if they rule that Israel is, just if the case has merit, ultimately the Americans at home, they will also be, the Biden administration will be in violation of the Genocide Implementation Act. So this is how treaties are translated into law. It's like the Human Rights Act is the translation of the Human Rights Convention in Britain. So the Biden administration will also be facing cases then because of their complicity, their support, material and political, for Israel. The problem is that even though the ICJ is the highest court in the UN system, Israel has a tradition, has a nasty habit of just giving the finger, pardon my French, to a lot of the UN rulings that come from the Security Council or otherwise. And these are legally binding. The 242 and many others have told Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories, from Syria's Golan Heights, from the West Bank, from Jerusalem. They don't listen. They do not care. And even though the Americans back then let these resolutions pass or voted in favor of them, they've broken with them since. And Biden is more than happy to keep Donald Trump's positions on Israel, which says a lot. I can only hope that something comes of this, because once the ICJ, if they rule in favor of South Africa's case and the Palestinians, all countries in the UN system, all UN member states and those who signed the convention will be obligated to also themselves prevent this genocide from continuing. It will have to cease and desist. Will they actually abide by it? I'm doubtful. I'm very doubtful. I think a lot of countries have shown themselves to be morally lacking. Yeah, and they have failed.
Morally bereft. But look at it this way, Richard. It actually could get some people off the hook. It could actually provide an exit ramp from something that is turning out to be a thoroughgoing disaster for virtually everyone concerned, except the arms manufacturers. It might, in an election year, allow Joe Biden to fight an election without this slaughter continuing on his watch at his expense or at the taxpayers' expense. It might provide an off-ramp for the European governments, who might be then able to say, well, look, obviously we're legally obliged to uphold this decision of the court, and so we can no longer send you weapons, money, and support you diplomatically, and so on. It's just a thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but I think they should still be held accountable nonetheless. And I know you would agree with me, but if it does provide an off-ramp, it should be for to end the conflict, to stop the bombs, but then everyone responsible should still be prosecuted one way or another, because if they are allowed to get away with this, you can say goodbye to humanity itself, because this is a crime on such an unprecedented scale. It's not like Cambodia, it's not like Rwanda, where it wasn't clear what was happening until after the fact. We saw this genocide, you and I and everyone on earth, we saw it from the very moment it began. And there have to be consequences. And I know Biden is fighting an election this year, and that's true. That's also why he doesn't want an escalation in the Red Sea, because Yemen's embargo is also going to affect oil prices, and they've struck Aramco in the past. If they want to, they can do it again. So he also has to take that into consideration. It certainly was during the midterms. And then, the only reason he got elected last time is because, black voters, Latino voters, young voters, voters of color came out and got him elected. And they should remember, everybody involved should remember in November, not to vote for Joe Biden, even if he stops this the next second, because his legacy should forever be that he committed genocide in Gaza.
Brilliant, Richard. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much, Richard Medhurst, the independent journalist and political analyst.